Dr. K.S. Kannan is the chair professor at IIT Madras. His publications include over 30 books on various subjects such as Ayurveda, Indology, and so on. Dr. K.S. Kannan could not be here, so we'll be playing his pre recorded video on Sheldon Pollock.
Namaskar, everybody. I present here a few points of my article on Professor Sheldon Pollock in the book 10 Heads of Ravana. Western Indology has been notorious for its evil propensities and acts of cultural genocide of all other systems of life and thought. Professor Sheldon Pollock is undoubtedly one of the 10 faces of this hideous demon. Before getting to know his work and its implications, we must get a glimpse of the issue. It is best to begin my talk with a quotation from Dr. Coenrod Elst, who is an exceptional Indologist who is sympathetic towards the Indian heritage. He assesses Pollock aptly. So, in a way, the case against Pollock is the case against Western Indology as a whole. Elst makes this statement in his article, which appears in a book edited by me, namely Western Indology and Its Quest for Power, Chennai, 2017, Infinity Foundation of India. Pollock represents best the anti-India, anti-Hindu, and anti-Sanskrit genre of literature that Western Indology espouses, or rather spouts. Structure of the talk. After speaking just a bit about myself, I will speak about the standing of Pollock and why he is important. Then I will also place before you how the essential arguments of Pollock have been refuted by me and some of my colleagues in the said volume. Dr. Conrad Elst, Dr. Konchi Gopinath, Dr. Jayaraman, and Dr. Soumya Krishnapur. 20 points totally. About myself, I have edited 7 volumes of papers presented in the 2 conferences of Swadeshi Indology held by IFI at Chennai and Delhi. The total output comes to around 1,500 pages, and the 7 volumes effectively bring out the hollowness and the specious nature of the arguments of Pollock. Who is Pollock, and what are his academic or other credentials? Pollock is Aravind Raghunathan Professor of South Asian Studies at the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University, New York. He is also a Padma Shri awardee. His The Language of Gods in the World of Men, 2006, won, ironically, the Kumaraswamy Award. Pollock is indeed the very antithesis of Kumaraswamy. In 2008, he became an editor of Clay Sanskrit series. 2015, he became the founding editor of Murthy Classical Library of India, Harvard University Press. MCLI, as it is known, was made possible by a donation of $4.5 million given by Rohan Murthy. The library addresses this issue that many classic Indic texts have never reached a global audience, while others are becoming increasingly inaccessible even to Indian readers. India has the single most complex and continuous multilingual tradition of literature in the world, which MCLI seeks to reintroduce to a new generation of readers. Pollock is also an avowed leftist. Pollock's views on Sanskrit and politics. While the central government in India declared year 2000 as the Sanskrit year, Pollock wrote an article entitled The Death of Sanskrit. Exactly then, there could perhaps be no greater irony than that. And this was, even though Modi was not the PM then, his animosity towards Modi ji will be touched upon a little later. For Pollock, Sanskrit Kavya is profoundly historicist political, which is to say, Pollock uses his power glasses everywhere, all for power, everything for power. He claims that there is an autobiographical element in some of Jagannatha's last poems, whereas in actual fact, many of these poems are already cited as examples in his magnum opus Rasagangadhara. But Pollock claims Jagannatha commemorates the death of his Muslim wife. All he wants to stress is the Muslim affiliation of Jagannatha and somehow mark it as important. Kavindracharya Saraswati had a big manuscript library. Pollock's surmise is that this must be owing to a pension from the Mughal emperor. He presents no documents for this, but just floats a guess. In some, he misses no chance to say something in favor of Muslims, as is the leftist wont. Pollock is generally spiteful of Sanskrit. Sanskrit literature became a practice of repetition and not renewal, he claims. Sanskrit is, like Latin, meant for but religion and priestcraft, he asserts, despite his wide reading. Pollock claims that there is nothing new in Sanskrit. What then about Navya Nyaya, a whole new field embodying a whole new technique? During Vijayanagar period, massive and extensive commentaries on the Vedas were produced, but Pollock says nothing new was produced in Sanskrit in the Vijayanagar period. He brands Jagannatha as the last Sanskrit poet, as if there have been no poets afterwards. And this reminds us of Pollock's own chelas calling him the last Sanskrit Pandit. Could there be more silly claims? Willful distortions. Pollock portrays the barbarous invader as trying to revive Sanskrit and thus exonerate Islamists. And he presents Indian kings as sabotaging Sanskrit. Pollock is thus a veritable precursor of Audrey Truschke. Islamists' willful library burning is whitewashed by him as mere fire accident. Contrast the assertion of Rajatarangini of Srivara. Sekandhara dharanatho yavanai preritah pura pustakani cha sarvani trinan yagnirivadahat. It gives a vivid description of the burning of the entire library. Linking Sanskrit with Nazism, Dr. Conrad Elst, the Flemish Indologist, and Professor K. Gopinath, an eminent scientist at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, have exposed Pollock in his most nefarious and pernicious aspects. Elst says, National Socialist connection of Sanskrit is heavily overinterpreted by Pollock and emphatically taken to be causal, as if the interest in Sanskrit has caused the Holocaust. Elst shows how Hitler held Hinduism in utter contempt. Pollock is prepared to concede the out of India theory, OIT, in order merely to link Sanskrit and Nazism, even though he is otherwise all opposed to OIT. Elst challenges Pollock, can he show even a single instance of any of the German Indologists actually declaring that they wanted genocide? Elst remarks, well, whereas there are issues of genocide in the Bible or Islamic sources, there is nothing in the entire and vast Vedic literature that can suggest anti-Semitism. Did Nazis ever need inspiration from Mimamsa? Not a single Nazi quote has Pollock given to that effect, even by implication, straight or contrived. Wild imagination of Pollock. Defrauding schemata. 3 steps, proposal, theorem, truism. This shows very well Pollock's protocol in intellectual cheating. An idea is first launched and argued in highbrow papers like the New York Review or the Economic and Political Weekly. Subsequently, it is presented as the received wisdom in more general media like the Washington Post or the Times of India. But the final stage is when the idea is presented as matter of course and conveyed through popular media, women's magazines, etc. That's what completes the instilling of false ideas in the popular mind. His methodical fraud is to promote an idea intended to become a fixture in our worldview. It is useful to repeat it, first as a topical proposal to be proven, then as a theorem deemed to have been proven, finally as a truism on which other proposals can be usefully and safely built. Is caste system anything like genocide? There is absolutely no evidence, textual or historical, to portray it as a genocide. Pollock exploits well the symmetry fallacy, namely, Westerners presume that Hinduism is quite like their own religions of the Abrahamic faith and therefore intolerant. Sling mud, even if the mud does not stick, the stain remains, they say, and Elst warns, he who fails to substantiate his allegations is verily guilty of slander. Pollock is clearly guilty on multiple counts. Elst raises the essential question about bestowing the stewardship of the production of Indian literature to him. Should the Sanskrit tradition be given in care to a professor of Sanskrit who stands by such a grave, though false, allegation against it? Propagandism. Regarding the modus operandi adopted by Pollock, Professor Gopinath says certain questions are posed, extraneous elements certainly brought in, and selected evidence then marshaled to deduce or suggest certain desired conclusion, which is in essence is how propagandist systems work. A sample of Western racism and genocide is how Jews and Christians were not being permitted to eat together. There was prohibition of intermarriage and of sexual intercourse between Christians and Jews. Jews were not permitted to show themselves in the streets during Passion Week. Their scale of genocide is also mind-boggling. Between 1846 and 1870, California's Native American population plunged from around 150,000 to just 30,000. By 1880, that is, in another 10 years, it was barely 16,000. Homicides, battles, massacres, and diseases, dislocation, and starvation were all willfully enforced, resulted in such decimation of population. As against all this, Columbus is still praised as the discoverer of the Americas. Raju Malhotra refers to these as the greatest episodes of ethnic cleansing and genocide of Native Americans who were regularly represented as innately inferior. Gopinath says, well, the victim is victimized in Pollock's analysis. Pollock claims that Hindutva is responsible for many ills that afflict India. Pollock is also famous for his participation in the petition for denial of US visa for Mr. Narendra Modi, even though there is not even a single FIR against Modi. Interventionism is a matter of right for the West. Pollock promptly poked his nose in Ram Janmabhoomi issue and had commented on even the Rath Yatra. Pollock makes a sinister claim regarding Sanskrit, namely, government feeding tubes and oxygen tanks may try to preserve the language in a state of quasi-animation, but most observers would agree that in some crucial way Sanskrit is dead. Proof to the contrary has been provided by Dr. Jayaraman in his article, which draws material from the Sanskrit Commission report instituted by the Government of India in 1957, which shows how British Raj had downgraded the facilities for the pursuit of Sanskrit. Sanskrit has not been allowed to enjoy even the status and facilities it had under the British Raj. And during the British period, the salary of Sanskrit teachers was half the salary of the teachers of other subjects. Contrary to Pollock's claims, there was abundant public participation in Sanskrit promotional activities. The cultural consciousness of the people at large showed itself in numerous non-governmental players, palace libraries, zamindars and merchants, mathas and temples all supported Sanskrit. In Andhra, non-Brahmin classes were imbued with Sanskrit. In Kerala, Yavas, Tiyas, Moplas and Christians too studied Sanskrit. Why Pollock loves to hate Sanskrit? Because it is the only pan-Indian language. Today there are 750 voluntary Sanskrit institutions, the report says. Widely shared, largely uniform, cosmopolitan style of Sanskrit inscriptional discourse reaching even up to the farthest corner of the Far East, which is to say the Sanskrit cosmopolis, are all an eyesore for him. Grammar and rhetorics. Danton's Kavyadarsha was, Pollock admits, the most influential work on the literary scene in the world history after Aristotle's Poetics. It cannot be doubted that Western linguistics owes immensely to Sanskrit linguistics, a fact acknowledged by many eminent linguists such as Bloomfield and Emino. Grammar and politics are mutually constituted, asserts Pollock. Dr. Soumya Krishnapur has shown how every evidence, within inverted quotes, Pollock provides for this falls short of his tall claims. The place of language care in the Indian social moral order was rather high. Pollock is a master of sleight of tongue. Pollock asserts that grammar is often found to be used metonymically, standing for knowledge of lexicology, prosody, and the like, including literature, but provides no proof whatsoever. In the inscriptional expression, Shabdartha Gandharva Nyayadhyanam, he picks the word Shabdartha alone and equates it with grammar. The Samudragupta inscription, 4th century CE, has no reference whatsoever to grammar. Pollock translates Shastra Sukshmartha Vedi as one who knows the subtleties of grammar. Pollock's own confession, the historical data is too thin to demonstrate the mutual constitutive relationship of grammar and power with much cogency, and yet he persists in his theme. Pollock has a ready escape route. At the end, he would say, further amassing data would only be redundant. Pollock's pattern of blaming Shastras for all the ills of India. Shastras have always been restrictive, he claims, and cites the famous Gita verse, Yash Shastra Vidhimutsrujya Vartate Kamakarataha, na sa siddhim avapnoti, na sukham na parangatim, and in the process vitiates Mimamsa, the king of Shastras. Theory and practice. Pollock says theory is derived from practice in the West, but as with many things, it is the reverse, the diametrically opposite in India. He also makes fantastic claims. The Veda constrains the production of new knowledge, as Shastras only reformulate what the Vedas have already stated. Theory is held to always and necessarily precede and govern practice. All knowledge is already pre existent, and what best may be accomplished is a regressive reappropriation of the past, he says, and also says experience, experiment, invention, discovery, and innovation are all logically excluded. Pollock abuses Satkaryavada for this. So knowledge must pre-exist in something in order that we may derive it thence. We ourselves do not create knowledge, but merely bring it to manifestation from the textual materials in which it lies concealed from us. The word textual is an unwarranted importation here in reading and interpreting Satkaryavada. Do Vedas or Shastras constrain progress and stunt creativity? We can present four easy contrary evidences. Panini's grammar, unparalleled to this day, binary system that issued out of Pingala, and the essential concepts of dramaturgy outlined by Bharata, and the comprehensive scheme of administration set forth in Kautilya's Arthashastra. Panini, as you may know, was described as a monument of human intelligence. It has been said of Ramanujan, the recent mathematician, that he had more creativity than most of us, as said by Bruce Brent, his biographer. The number of works produced in mathematics and medicine alone can be mind-boggling. The works of Muhlenbeld and Ujastik, contemporary scholars of Ayurvedic history, can attest to this. For their numerous discoveries, hundreds of Galileos could have been incarcerated and dozens of Brunos burnt here, but nothing whatsoever happened here. Asabiya, that is, not believing in the God of the state, was a crime in the West, but was never a crime in India. Again, Abrahamic faiths are opposed to the theory of evolution and are endeavoring to overthrow it by hook or by crook. Even the heliocentric theory too found no acceptance till recently. Is there no scope for pratyaksha in Ayurveda? What says that a novice can learn after all via Pratyaksha and Anumana alone without Upadesha? Asks Charaka, emphasizing the role of testimony. Pollock vitiates this statement. Due importance has been given to Pratyaksha in Ayurveda. Inference in general, Charaka says, is based on Pratyaksha, on perception. It is Pratyaksha Purva. And in sections on perception and inference, no Agama texts have been invoked by Charaka. Pollock claims that Prayoga issued only from Shastra, but there is no text making such absurd claims. On the contrary, says Arthashastra, Sarvashastran Upakramya Prayogam Upalabhya Cha. There are more issues. Pollock's views on the Ramayana, on Rasa, on Mimamsa, on chronology, etc. are all controversial, but have not been dealt with here for sheer lack of time. The Eastern attitude is best reflected in Matthew Arnold's words typifying the Eastern attitude to the Western onslaughts. The East bowed low before the blast in patient deep disdain. She let the legions thunder past and plunged in thought again.